We support them because there has to be certainty in the marketplace. You can't have a situation where, when it comes to health care, when people like Joe Citizen, ordinary South African citizen, has to access that health care, then is faced with a situation where there's uncertainty about what will be charged. What will be charged can be any quantum, any time, and every time, and then that person is held ransom by that situation. Mm. So we welcome the intervention by the Health Professions Council of South Africa, and as you would know, Kolani, they have the statutory mandate in terms of the Health Professions Council Act to behave in this way, and the aim here is to protect Joe Citizen. People of South Africa must understand that when an ordinary human being is sick and is ill, you are at your weakest. You are very vulnerable. You don't have a choice of saying, I will not seek medical help, because if you don't, you get worse and you die. Mm. Therefore, as a human being, you are at your weakest and the most vulnerable. Mm. That's not the time for those who then can help you to exploit the situation. That's why you have to have laws in place that speak to how that person should behave, and more importantly, how much that person should charge, so that he or she does not charge an exorbitant amount just because you're at your weakest.
Right. What was the situation prior to these guidelines? Were the dentists just at will to charge whatever they wanted to?
Well, the situation prior to this, as you know, was the NHIPR process, which started in 2004, 2005, and then pronounced in 2006. Mm. And then, of course, to take into consideration various issues, the Department of Health went through a process to come up with the 2007, 2008 one, and 2009, and that one was challenged. And when it was challenged in court, then there was nothing in place. During that time, when the 2007, 2008, 2009 were in place and then challenged, the HPCSA, which had an ethical tariff at the time, which was saying you cannot charge more than 400-500% of NHRPL, as a maximum, then also abolished that ethical tariff, because they said there's no need for HPCSA to have that ethical tariff when the NHR process is in place. So basically, for the last 2-3 years, there's been a void where, from the Health Professions Council side, there is nothing that serves as a guideline by which doctors can be charged whether they're overcharged or not. Yeah.
All right, let's look at terminology. Tariff guidelines versus price controls. Is that the same thing?
Well, tariff guidelines is something that is saying for this procedure, done this way, it would be appropriate for this kind of fee to be charged.
But in a competitive environment, how does that fare? Because we're a competitive environment, and therefore I expect to, if I go to dentist A, perhaps dentist A is charging too much. I want to move to dentist B and then see if they're charging me a lot less.
It is very questionable whether in healthcare actually you get that kind of competition. When you are ill and you seek that dental help, you go to the dentist that's available to you at the time. You don't have the luxury to be shopping around. If you still have the luxury to shop around, maybe you're not that ill yet. You're still preparing for something. Therein lies the danger. And again, competition really works when the consumer is king. When you are ill, you are not king. You are vulnerable. You are at your weakest. You actually relinquish some of your decision-making processes to those who know better. And you would hope that those who know better will not exploit the situation.
Ms. Smith, let's bring you in this conversation. Firstly, give us a sense of how the guidelines are going to change the way you've been doing business as dentists.
Kulani, I would say that would depend on every single practitioner out in the environment and the kind of discussions that they would have with their patients and consumers of their services. We don't foresee that immediately everybody is going to revert to these guidelines that have been published. I think it is going to take time, but we do believe that this is completely in contravention with the Competition Act, because it has the potential for all the pricing in healthcare to gravitate towards the pricing that's been published. And that pricing is completely flawed, because it's not been done on any basis of cost related to services. So
So in other words, it's arbitrary. You don't think that it takes into account input costs and it takes into account administrative costs and all the other costs that are involved?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The original reference price list was based on the kind of benefit that the medical schemes were prepared to pay, not the cost or the price that the practitioner is prepared to accept. And we don't believe that that is the basis on which a market should determine what is a fair cost. One should go through proper cost studies. And in fact, if I can quote the Government Gazette of 2009, it says the underlying principle to the approach for reference pricing is that the cost of providing the particular service must be made explicit and that this cost forms the basis of the reference price. None of these studies have been done. I want to make it very, very clear that we are in support of a guideline in the market. We do agree that there should be certainty. And we agree that there might have been some practitioners who took advantage of the current situation, as there have been some schemes that have taken advantage of the current situation. So there should be something in the market, but that should be cost-based, and it should be reasonable in terms of what the practitioner, in terms of the practitioner's business.
I think that's a central question then, and I'm going to quickly go back to Dr. Zogufa then about how the price was determined.
I agree with Murray that there has to be a process that is consultative, that is reasonable, that adequately remunerates the professionals when it comes to this.
And apparently that didn't happen, because what the argument that's been put forward by the Dental Association, for instance, is that the Health Professions Council, when it consulted, it did so in bad faith.
Well, I think that would be better answered by the Health Professions Council, because they're the ones who really handled this. From our side as a Board of Healthcare Funders, we are supportive of an approach that begins to take into consideration what Marius is saying. Alongside that, we are saying then there has to be transparency. If we agree in principle that the model in place should take care of all the costs associated with rendering a particular service, then alongside that, let's have honest transparencies in terms of exposing and unlocking all those costs, so that at the end of the day, when Joe Citizen pays, let's say, 300 rands for a consultation, Joe Citizen feels that is a fair price. I'm not being done in. I'm not taken advantage of. It's a value for money. It takes care of the hidden cost of rendering that service in return.
But the implication, and I'm going to come back to you, Maritha, in a second, the implication of what you are saying is that there is a lot of exploitation going on within the industry.
The potential for exploitation is there.
But what Maritha is saying is that there are isolated cases, that there are individuals, I suppose, implying that it's an isolated matter, as would be the case as well with the medical schemes.
Even if it's an isolated case, even if it's not in the main, the potential of it being there and increasing in terms of the normal practice is a threat enough for something to be done immediately. For instance, I would say, in the main, a lot of the medical doctors and dentists that are there are good, ethical people. They are not people who are out to do the South African citizen in the main. But then those few isolated cases that then embark on activities that discredit that activity is bringing to question for those who ethically behave. If I behave ethically and others don't behave ethically and they get away with it, why can't I do the same if it means more money for me?
And I suppose then the question, Maritha, is the ability of associations such as yourself to self-police? Because perhaps we didn't have to be in this situation had the associations such as yours had the ability, capability to police themselves. Let me welcome on the line also Dr. Mark Sonderup. He is with the South African Medical Association. In fact, he is, as I understand it, the acting head of the South African Medical Association. Firstly, give me your broad views on these guidelines.
Polani, I think in one word, from Simon's perspective, deeply disappointed. I know that's two words, but I can't express it more than that. We just feel that the Health Professions Council was truly in a unique position here to actually advance this issue forward. That has been going around in circles for very many years. And unfortunately, they have taken us backwards, almost by a decade, I believe. The issue really is around fair and commensurate tariffs in the private industry for doctors and dentists. And I picked up on the discussion earlier. You know, this was not a process where they did not receive valid inputs. Many organizations, including ourselves, provided well over a year ago the Health Professions Council with extremely valid inputs based on years of work in terms of a fair and commensurate pricing system. And all they've done at the end of the day is go back to the 2006 NHRPL, inflated it by 46%. Now, I heard Dr. Zokufa make a statement earlier about the 2006, and that was a basis, et cetera, on which to base this particular tariff on. But Polani, for me, this is, again, a very typical situation, and I believe people are being disingenuous, because it's a typical situation of trying to turn the tables and make practitioners out to be the cost drivers in the private healthcare sector. And I think it's time we start dispelling that myth.
I suppose one way, though, of dispelling it is if you tell us exactly what are the cost drivers.
Well, let's just look at this particular tariff. So this tariff that the HPCSA has published, and I want to come back to the issue of whether the HPCSA should be doing this or not a little bit later. But the HPCSA tariff is 2006 numbers. They've inflated by 46.6%. Okay. In the intervening 6 years, medical scheme contributions have gone up 105%. Now you tell me, and I want Dr. Zokufa to answer this on behalf of the funders. Yeah. How come there's been that cost escalation, but doctors and dentists must settle for a tariff like this? If you look at the numbers, doctors and dentists account for about 1/5 to 1/4 of all the private healthcare expenditure in this country. Where is the other 75% going to? And how come everybody's focusing on the people who are not responsible for the costs? This is what I cannot understand.
Dr. Zagufa?
Well, I think what has to be appreciated here is that the increases in contributions to medical aid schemes are approved by the Council of Medical Schemes, which is a statutory body. And they are approved based on the various benefit packages that each medical scheme submits to the council and the regulator. Evaluate that and says that should be the increase. The increase in contributions over the years have been higher than CPI because the medical schemes on the other side are pursuing the high costs. Along the same lines as they are pursuing the high costs, they are hitting deficits.
All right. Let's just simplify this. Do you, though, accept, Dr. Zogufa, that it's unfair on the doctors, that the medical schemes have received upwards of 100% in terms of the increases, yet doctors are expected to, from the 2006 base, add 46%? Do you accept that that is completely unacceptable, especially on the part of doctors?
What I can say is that that's what the HPCSA has worked out.
They may have, but I mean, you probably have a view as well as the healthcare funders that this is unfair.
Well, I don't want to qualify it at this point because one has to look deeper into it. I mean, to be comparing what the increases have been to medical aid schemes on one side and compare that to what doctors are getting now as a 46% may not be a fair comparison.
Why?
Because there's a lot in between that has to be taken care of.
Such as?
Such as, for instance, it's not what the medical aid schemes pay for is not only for the GPs, it's not only for the specialists, but it's also for the private hospitals. And 33% of what you pay out goes to private hospitals. And 22% goes to specialists. And then all the other categories are not getting as much. More than 50% of what we pay out goes to specialists and private hospitals.
So the point you're making is that it's not about the profitability of the medical schemes versus the profitability of the practitioners.
It's about what the medical schemes have to pay for. And they have to pay private hospitals, they have to pay specialists, and they determine the fees.